The road to the village was even more desolate than I had imagined. The sky hung heavy with thick, oppressive clouds, and the distant mountains were swallowed by mist. On either side of the cracked asphalt, dead trees stretched their twisted limbs skyward, like skeletal hands grasping at something unseen. The road itself was fractured and worn, each bump sending a dull, hollow echo through the car. My GPS flickered in and out of signal, as if the land itself resisted the presence of the modern world. At last, the village emerged from the fog. A row of squat, weathered houses crouched low against the earth, like corpses in eternal slumber. A damp, rotting scent lingered in the air. The streets were empty, eerily so, like this place had been abandoned long ago, left to be forgotten by time. I pulled up beside a decaying gas station, killed the engine, and stepped out. A sharp gust of wind lashed against my skin, cold enough to raise the hairs on the back of my neck. The only building with any light was the tavern. Inside, the glow of oil lamps flickered weakly, casting warped shadows across the walls. No one spoke to me. The moment I entered, the murmured conversations of the old men at the bar ceased, snuffed out like a candle. The air thickened, forming an invisible wall between me and them. I ordered a cheap whiskey, hoping to pry some information from the bartender. But he avoided my gaze, poured my drink with hurried hands, and disappeared before I could press further. They were avoiding something. Something that couldn't be spoken of. I took a slow sip, the harsh burn of alcohol searing down my throat. And in that silence, in that carefully manufactured stillness, I felt it, something was moving in this room. Not a person. Something else. There was no one in the village. Instead, they sent me to a derelict cottage on the outskirts. The door was heavy, its rusted hinges screaming in protest as I forced it open. A damp, moldy stench curled through the air, thick with decay. Stains marred the walls, dark patches of moisture forming grotesque, almost human-like shapes. Broken furniture was piled haphazardly in the corners, and in the center of the room stood a lone, tattered bed, its sheets thick with dust, as if no one had touched them in years. I set down my bag, trying to adjust to the oppressive stillness. Night fell. The wind slipped through the cracks in the windows, weaving through the house with soft, ghostly whispers. I curled beneath the covers, willing myself to sleep. But something was wrong. A slow, creeping unease settled into my bones. Then, at midnight, the temperature dropped. The air turned frigid, and I watched as my breath curled into white mist before me. And that was when I heard it. A song. Low. Distant. A girl's voice, humming. The melody was simple, but something about it sent a deep, primal chill through me. It was mournful, hollow, filled with an aching sorrow. I held my breath, listening. The sound drifted, sometimes near, sometimes far. At moments, it seemed to come from the depths of the forest beyond the village. And then, just as suddenly, it felt like it was right beside me, whispering against my ear. I grabbed the recorder from the nightstand and hit the record button. But through my headphones, there was only silence. No song. No voice. Just the empty crackle of static. My pulse quickened. The darkness around me felt heavier now, more alive. Then, the wind stopped. The song cut off. And the house fell into an unnatural, suffocating silence. Even the rats in the rafters had gone still. And then, I heard it. A knock. Slow. Heavy. From the door. Something was standing on the other side. Waiting. Listening. Waiting for me to respond. I woke to the biting chill of early morning, but the sound of last night's knocking still echoed in my mind. Summoning my courage, I opened the door. Nothing. No one was there. But on the wooden floor, faint streaks of water glistened in the pale light, thin, damp trails stretching from the doorway into the house. Like something had walked inside during the night. I didn't remember answering the knock. But deep in my gut, an uneasy feeling twisted inside me, an instinctive dread that whispered I might have already been marked. The village felt even deader in the daylight. Few people wandered the streets, and those who did moved with silent urgency, as if avoiding something unseen. I tried asking the villagers about the song from last night. Their responses, or rather, their lack of responses, spoke volumes. Some averted their eyes, their expressions tightening as they quickened their pace, unwilling to even acknowledge my words. Others turned their backs completely, leaving me standing there in the dust without so much as a meaningless excuse. At the village's small grocery store, I pressed the shopkeeper for answers. His face turned pale in an instant. His lips quivered slightly, and his fingers twitched against the wooden counter, tracing invisible patterns. Finally, at the edge of the village, I found him, Gerhard, the oldest man in town. He sat hunched in a worn-out wicker chair, his sunken eyes veined with red. His gaze was murky, distant, yet behind it lurked something colder. Something knowing. For a long moment, he simply watched me. Measuring. Weighing. But when I mentioned this song, his posture stiffened. His lips parted, and at last, he spoke.
You heard it. That was her song.
He never said her name. Even after all these years, it seemed that name still carried something heavy, something cursed. His hands trembled slightly over his knees, his fingers curling as if he were grasping at memories long buried.
They hanged her.
His voice was low, nearly lost to the wind.
A long time ago, the villagers believed she was a witch. They dragged her to the old tree at the village entrance, slipped the rope around her neck.
I swallowed hard, a creeping chill seeping down my spine.
But she never screamed. Never cried.
His eyes darkened, lost in the past.
She just kept humming that song. She hummed it until there was nothing left of her.
The cold in my bones deepened, a sensation like something unseen slithering up my back. Gerhard's voice turned hoarse, lower than before.
They thought killing her would end their fear. But ever since that night, when the sun goes down, the wind carries her song.
A shadow crossed his face. His mouth twitched slightly, as if hesitating before speaking his next words.
Some people.
He exhaled slowly.
Some people, when they hear it, they can't help themselves. They answer.
A pause.
And the ones who do.
He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Because the way he looked at me said enough. Like a man staring at something already doomed. Then, his eyes lifted, locking onto mine with an intensity that sent ice into my veins.
You didn't answer her, did you?
His voice rasped. Low. Uneasy. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Something thick and cold lodged itself in my throat. I replayed last night in my head. The knock. The silence. And then, a memory. Soft. Almost an afterthought. I had muttered, "Who's there?" Barely a whisper. Barely anything at all. But enough. I shot to my feet, my pulse slamming against my ribs. Cold sweat trickled down my palms. If everything Gerhard said was true, then she had heard me. The village at night was even more unsettling than during the day. The air felt thick, heavy, like a suffocating veil pressing down over everything. The wind had died, the trees stood motionless, and an unnatural silence stretched across the land, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something unspeakable to arrive. I walked along the muddy path toward the village entrance, my footsteps unnervingly loud against the stillness. Every step felt deliberate, each one carrying me further towards something irreversible. The old tree loomed in the center of the barren field, its twisted branches casting eerie, skeletal shadows in the moonlight, like unseen chains still binding something to this place. As I approached, a faint dampness lingered in the air, mingling with the scent of decayed earth. It smelled like something that had never fully rotted, something still breathing beneath the soil. The bark was scarred with deep, erratic scratches, crisscrossing like frantic, desperate attempts to carve something into the wood. Some marks ran deeper than others, gouged so forcefully they looked almost deliberate, symbols that had been scratched away and rewritten over and over until they were too distorted to understand. I reached out, barely brushing my fingertips against the rough surface. And a sudden gust of freezing wind tore through me. A shudder racked my spine. I held my breath, listening. The silence was suffocating. And yet, beneath that silence, I heard it.
Did you hear it?
The voice was right in my ear. Soft. Hoarse. Like a breath of the dead against my skin. I spun around. Nothing. No one. Only the darkness stretching endlessly behind me. But even though my eyes saw nothing, I felt it. Something was there. Watching me. Unmoving. The wind shifted again, but this time it carried more than just cold air. A melody. Low, fractured, so faint it barely existed. Someone was humming. The same song. The same song from last night. But now, it was more erratic, flickering through the air like something gliding just beneath my skin, brushing against me before vanishing again. I forced myself to think rationally. It was just the wind. It had to be the wind. Then, suddenly, the dead leaves on the ground erupted, scattering in all directions as if something unseen had just rushed past me. Instinct took over. I stumbled backward, my foot catching on something solid. I lost my balance, collapsing onto the damp earth. My hand sank into the cold, wet ground, the moisture seeping through my fingers. It was warm. Uncomfortably so. And then, I looked down. It wasn't mud. It was water. Dark. Still. Perfectly smooth except for the faint ripples where my hands had disturbed the surface. The water reflected the pale sliver of the moon above. And then, it reflected something else. A face. Not mine. Someone standing beside me. I jerked back, my pulse hammering in my skull. She was there. Standing just inches away. Her black hair hung in damp strands over her shoulders, clinging to her skin like seaweed. Her complexion was deathly pale, tinged with a sickly, bluish-gray hue. But it was her eyes that made my blood freeze, two hollow voids, empty and endless, swallowing the light. And her lips. They moved. Opening. Closing. Opening. Closing. Soundless. But I knew what she was doing. She was singing. That same cursed song. I didn't think, I ran. I didn't care where, as long as it was away. My feet barely touched the ground as I tore through the village, my heart hammering so violently I thought it might burst. The cottage came into view, its door already open. The door frame. Deep grooves lined the wood, scratches I hadn't noticed before. But now, they seemed even deeper than they had been in the daylight. Almost like they were growing. Forming something. Something I wasn't meant to understand. I burst through the doorway, slamming it shut behind me. For a long moment, I stood there, panting, my back pressed against the wall, my ears straining for any sound beyond the door. Nothing. Just silence. Then, my gaze dropped to the floor. And I saw it. A photograph. Old, yellowed at the edges. Someone had left it there, right in the center of the room. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The image was faded, nearly unrecognizable. But I could still make out one face. Gerhard. Younger, standing among a group of villagers. Their expressions were twisted, grim, almost distorted. And in the center, a girl. Suspended. A rope dug deep into the flesh of her throat, her feet limp, hanging lifelessly above the ground. But her lips, even in death, were slightly parted, as if she was still humming her final song. I found Gerhard sitting in the dimly lit room, his frail hands trembling as they gripped his cane. He looked at me with hollow, lifeless eyes, like a man who had long resigned himself to this moment. He didn't ask any questions. He simply murmured,
"She has heard you."
And then I understood. He and the villagers weren't just witnesses. They were executioners. They were the ones who had stolen Emilia's life. And her song, her cursed, ceaseless song, was her vengeance. A punishment that stretched beyond death, binding itself to anyone unfortunate enough to hear it. Now, I was caught in that curse. I had heard her. I had answered her. And she would not let me leave this village alive. Gerhard told me there was only one way to put her to rest, one chance to break the curse.
At midnight, stand beneath the old tree. Sing her song. The whole melody. Only when the living voice it will the dead fall silent.
Midnight. I stood beneath the gnarled branches of the old tree, my legs shaking, my throat dry as cracked earth. The wind howled through the night, carrying whispers of something unseen. I forced myself to sing, my voice trembling, barely audible at first. And then, the wind changed. A voice, faint and weightless, wove itself into my own. Hers. Emilia. She was singing with me. A cold hand settled gently on my shoulder. The world around me shifted. I was no longer in the present. I was there, with them. Villagers surrounded me, their faces twisted in fervent rage, torches burning in their fists.
"Burn the witch! Hang her!"
Their screams clawed in my ears as they pushed me forward. Toward the rope. Toward the waiting noose that swayed from the tree's lowest branch. I struggled, but my hands were bound. The wooden platform beneath my feet creaked, thin and splintering, ready to break at any moment. I lifted my head, and I saw her. Emilia. No longer the helpless girl from the past. She stood at the front of the crowd, watching me, her lips curling into a slow, deliberate smile. And beside her, Gerhard. His expression mirrored hers, his eyes two pits of darkness, deep and endless, filled with something vile. They were watching me the way one watches a ritual. A sacrifice. A replacement.
Your turn now.
Emilia's voice was soft, almost tender. Her song resumed. Cold. Cruel. Hungry. The wooden platform snapped beneath me. The rope jerked tight around my throat. The world vanished in a suffocating blackness. And in that final moment, before oblivion took me, I heard it. The wind drifting through the village. Still humming that same, never-ending melody.